Shoot, I'm so happy to see Russ, I'm so happy to see you here. Hello. And others, Gavin and Brian and Jim is the one who got me back together with Rosanne. Hey, Russ.
Hi, David. Good to see you, and glad this worked out. Looking forward to what I know will be a great talk on
Yeah, Russ
interest of much interest on a topic of much interest.
Indeed, indeed. So I hope you take a few minutes, Russ, during the Q&A. We have an extended Q&A, and we have a very distinguished group here that's, I think, capable of doing quite a lot of brainstorming on what we can do on the basis of this. Well, I think maybe I will start, and Paul will admit new people. So Rosanne, we met, I went back to check my email, and we met in 2014, which seems like a long time ago. And at that time, you were already made a name for yourself, addressing the homelessness problem. And I was so much in admiration of what you were doing. And so lost touch until recently when the Pro-Social Commons got started up, and Jim Schlosser, who's here, who's working on homelessness in his town of Concord, New Hampshire, mentioned your name. And I thought, man, we got to get back in touch. And so we did. And just after you received the MacArthur Foundation's 100 and change grant, and it was so nice to touch base with you and to have you come back and to have you talk to our group. And one of the things I'm so impressed by is basically your ability to work towards and accomplish systemic change, very large scale systemic change, which is what we're trying to do. And you're doing it so well. So I think we have so much to learn from you. And then you asked me to advance the slides for you. So shall I bring up the slide? Did you like to introduce yourself first, Rosanne, more gracefully than I have?
No, thank you so much for the invitation to join you. And thank you to Jim for reconnecting us. You are an inspiration as we are beginning to shift our work into this more systems building realm, David. So very much appreciate the chance to actually process what we've learned over the last, it's actually over the last almost 30 years, but I think that has accelerated considerably since we made the shift that I'll be describing tonight. But I'm also in Concord, New Hampshire, so we have like an overrepresentation, I think, of Concord people on this particular call. But as David mentioned, our work at Community Solutions has been about building a system to bring about a lasting end to homelessness that leaves no one behind. That's our mission, and I think it's never been just about aspiration. Even early on in our work, we could see that some of the usual explanations for the problem really did not hold water. But it took us a long time to realize how to think about this issue in a way that could actually make it solvable and bring about the kind of system level shifts that we're beginning to see now. But David, if you could maybe go to, I'd say, put the opening slide up, but then move quickly to the second slide. I'll start with really a vision of like where we are, and then we'll go back and describe how we got there. So we are a not-for-profit working across the United States in 105 communities, and the boundaries of these geographies are, of course, significant. And what we have really aligned ourselves with are the boundaries of what are called in homelessness world the continuum of care. This is one of the challenges in the path of solving this problem. Continua of care were established by HUD in 1995, basically as a way of reducing the number of applications the HUD staff had to read for homelessness grants. And so it's completely random. The country is, we can go back to the other slide, David. these geographies are completely random. They tend to track county boundaries, sometimes regional boundaries. But to give you an example of, and just bearing in mind Ostrom's principles, the geographies are being so random a part of the problem. For example, in the Boston area, within about 10 miles of Boston, you have 7 different COCs. And then most of Texas is one COC. And so people are not kind of gathered in any kind of meaningful geographic relationship to the issue. However, we are now working with 105 of the approximately 400 COCs in the country. So kind of a meaningful penetration of communities of COCs of every kind of political stripe and of typology of community, largely urban, large urban, suburban, rural, blended. And so we have a very good distribution and as far as our learning system now. And while what we are aiming for is the system level shifts of communities ending homelessness at the population level, typically one population at a time, we certainly do keep track of what that means in terms of numbers of individuals housed along the way. And since we started working in this Built for Zero framework, which I'll be walking you through, more than 147,000 people have benefited largely from improved systems, and that they left experiencing homelessness for many years as an individual experiencing chronic homelessness or a homeless veteran, and are now housed. And 14 of our 105 communities have gotten to this place of functional zero and sustained it, which means, and we'll describe it later, that they have ended homelessness by sort of learning to keep ahead of it for entire populations, typically veterans and or chronically homeless individuals. We start communities there and then help them build their systems to cover everyone. But the critical kind of moment that we found where communities can actually move from doing random worthy things to actually solving the problem is getting to a place of knowing by name in real time, comprehensively across this geography, who is experiencing homelessness, and being able to use that both population level pattern kind of measure and vision of the issue, as well as having the person level data all in one place, and those views at 2 levels really informing how the community moves toward a sustained solution. And then it's also meaningful that a lot of the victories take time to build. We have a number of communities are in the last mile toward getting to that functional zero place, and we have now 42 communities that are seeing measurable reductions in homelessness at the population level. Again, just very much counter the narrative around this issue in the country and globally that there isn't enough housing, there isn't enough money. We're saying, like, if you focus on the system, you see progress, and have a sense of where the housing needs to go, and can begin to actually see a new kind of picture of what's possible emerge. So that's where we are now. But let me describe to you the evolution of the work and how we got here. So David, if you could go to the next slide. So our work at Community Solutions actually began with an earlier not-for-profit I founded called Common Ground. It's now called Breaking Ground, but in New York City in 1990. And the thought then, and thought still probably that predominates, is that homelessness is a housing problem alone. And that is certainly true, that almost every city and community in the country needs more affordable housing, needs a wider range of housing options that suit people's needs at various stages of their lives. But back in the day, I thought it was just the housing question. We just needed to build more housing for people experiencing homelessness. And we needed to build housing that was maybe more flexible or better resourced for folks who are also contending with issues beyond homelessness, for example, mental health and addiction and other health issues. And so in the first not-for-profit, we ended up acquiring and renovating or building from the ground up about 3,000 units of housing in and around Times Square to begin with, and then branching out to Brooklyn and the Bronx as well. And then in our last phase into the region, into Connecticut and upstate New York. And different typologies, housing that focused on young people experiencing homelessness, individuals who had serious and persistent mental health issues, individuals who were over the age of 65, individuals who had HIV/AIDS and other medical needs. So we created a wide variety of housing and we're winning awards, and I think appropriately being kind of recognized as offering important models that created housing options that were needed for individuals who had literally been left on the street, or whose only option at that point were congregate shelters in New York. However, the idea that we had found the solution, we weren't buying it, because we were still passing people living on the street in and around our largest buildings in the middle of Manhattan, who had been living on the street prior to our opening these buildings. And we're like, wasn't this supposed to magically work itself out? Open the housing intended for people experiencing homelessness, and they would move in, and our neighborhood would be like a different place. And it took us a while to sort of question and begin unraveling what was missing here, that we would be building more housing and yet homelessness was increasing, and the amount of money being spent and the amount of activity on the part of many other not-for-profits was also escalating, along with the numbers of those experiencing homelessness. And so it really took and kind of a series of events and kind of reckonings to begin just questioning our own assumptions. And the turning point to the work that we have been doing ever since was to actually go out and spend time with those individuals who were living on the street for long periods of time, and ask them, what do you need in terms of your housing? Why are you not being connected to our housing? And it goes to probably an illustration of how one begins to understand system problems, for me to say, we were the housing people, other groups had contracts to do the outreach and to operate the shelters, and none of us were talking with each other. And because we were flooded with applications from people who were homeless and needing our housing, we never thought to question, why are the people who were inspiring us in the first place to be doing all this work, how come they're not getting in? Well, it took us years to just start asking those people directly about what was the system of homelessness they were experiencing, or one might say the broken housing system that they were experiencing. And so out of that realization that it was this disconnection, this failure for the whole issue to have any accountability or an owner, that it was really no one's job to be ending homelessness in New York City, or anywhere for that matter. We were all being judged on whether we were running good programs and in compliance with what HUD or the city or the state was requiring that we do with the money we receive for these efforts. And so the probably the iconic moment of knowing we needed to change course could be illustrated by the following slide, David, which is we started getting in different parts of Manhattan, and then we started working with other cities on this, getting together groups of people who needed to cooperate for a single individual to be housed from the street into what was typically publicly assisted housing. And so we'd have in each of these gatherings the different agencies who had a role, the outreach teams, the city that had to sign off on people's eligibility, the shelter operator, the housing provider, the person who had to do the psychosocial exam to validate that someone qualified for mental health services if the unit was subsidized in part by the Office of Mental Health. there are like dozens of organizations involved in housing any single person. And we'd have people who are living on the street attend these sessions and basically explain to people where their beliefs about how the system were just off. And what was fascinating, on average, it took about 3 hours for groups to even describe how the system they were a part of perhaps worked. And usually these maps were like the road to nowhere. But over 40 steps, like people having to exchange information who had never met, and rules around original copies of this, or something lapsed eligibility after 6 months. All of this craziness only got surfaced when we had these kinds of sessions. And interestingly, it took on average 12 minutes when we asked the same group, what should the system look like if it was serious about getting people out of homelessness quickly? It's just like, well, you do this, this, and this, and the other thing. And, you could do this, this. And so this, we realized, was the problem that needed solving. If we were going to be an organization that was serious about our mission being to bring about a lasting end to homelessness, we could be building those buildings till the cows came home and not actually touch what was really in the water, which is this broken system, and the fact that there was no ownership of the outcome, and that many, many groups needed to collaborate toward a common goal for this problem to be resolved. And so we've been learning our way forward ever since. And just to give you a sense of like what we realized at this point we sort of had to face into. We can go to the next slide, David, which was like in any community, like it wasn't just a couple of different organizations. There were like maybe 20 different systems that had a role to play, that had a piece of the information, a piece of the resource, a piece of the regulation, a piece of the relationship with the individual experiencing homelessness. And then within each system, there were multiple actors, different organizations, often with conflicting approaches, different contracts with different outcomes, all sorts of incentives that were misaligned. And so stepping back, we realized, and by this time I'm, cramming readings on, systems theory. At this point, we're like, okay, we've got to start with the aim. And so to the next slide, we basically said our mission, and at this point we created a new organization, Community Solutions, was to work backward from how we answer this question, how we help communities answer this question, to get to an end state on homelessness. The key thing we had to focus on was, and ask communities to do with our help, was to see this as the core challenge, that is everything adding up to what we really want, which is equitable reductions in homelessness over time, because this, we realized, was not going to be a program, not going to be like a pilot. It was basically going to be rethinking the way everything worked, the way everyone behaved, the way money flowed, the assumptions that were driving the system. And that part of this was also going to be getting to a place that needed to be flexible for all time, because homelessness, like any complex problem, moves and changes every day. And so what needed to be created, and what we had to figure out with communities who are willing to voluntarily work with us, is how could you build essentially a learning system with a clear aim, with a life-saving purpose, that, where the end state looked like knowing how to solve the problem every day and keep adjusting and staying ahead of the problem. So, that's what our mission became. And what we started doing to try to educate ourselves about how complex problems got solved, as opposed to, what were best practices on homelessness, was, and to the next slide, David, we began thinking about, like, who else is working on these kinds of problems? And so we really leaned in initially to global health and to learning from the world of disease eradication and how multiple players could actually execute over time a whole new system. And this is, you're looking at, frankly, it could be a huddle of folks working on homelessness, but it happens to be a group in Nigeria working on the last mile efforts on polio. And we began to see that the kinds of efforts that we needed to mount in homelessness had a couple of things in common, and which we began testing in the next phase of our work, which began actually, we incubated it at Common Ground, but we sort of officially launched Community Solution just after we had announced and begun working with, I think, an initial group of 30 communities on the 100,000 Homes campaign. And so very much informed by global health and other system improvement practices, we launched this effort at the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference, which is kind of like, the annual family wedding of the homelessness sector, that we were inviting communities who recognized that the problem in part was us and the fact that we weren't, collaborating in our communities, to work together to, over the next 3 years, house 100,000 of the most chronic and medically vulnerable people experiencing homelessness in the country. And we really, kind of took as our model, we're going to need teams, we're going to need data, we're going to need new skills, which at that point we'd really become very influenced by and trained up in quality improvement, working with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And so we launched the 100,000 Homes campaign. And and we can go to the next slide, David, that ended up, we had to extend it by a year because we were, learning along the way that, some of our assumptions just were, incorrect, and learning, like how we needed to help communities change their workflows so that they could achieve what we thought at that point was the right system aim, which was accelerating the housing placement process, making all of the activities that I was describing earlier add up to more people being housed more quickly. And we actually, in 4 years, achieved that goal. 186 communities ultimately participated, and more than 105,000 people were housed. But we're learning even along the way that that was not going to be enough. And indeed, when we got to the end of the 100,000 Homes campaign, we saw that like a huge number of people's lives had been changed. They, were in housing now. Communities were using data. They were working in teams. But the goal of a certain number of people in housing really failed to account for the dynamics of the system. And so at the end of the 100,000 Homes campaign, we paused and began really interrogating what we'd learned. And we took a fresh cut at what we saw as the remaining problems that, in part we'd identified, but we didn't have sort of an adequate solution in that, kind of that single focus on just housing placement acceleration. And so we kind of lingered over the persistent and problems, and then the new problems we'd identified. We saw the problem that had really gotten us started, that it was a problem that many people touched, but no one really owned. And we had begun experimenting with and proven the effectiveness of almost a command center, as we came to call it, with community-wide accountability for getting to a result, not just working with a single organization, but getting everybody who needed to cooperate around the same table. We learned in the 100,000 Homes campaign that we were still in the world of defining success in program terms, because in some ways, the 100,000 Homes campaign was still a program. It was like an initiative. It was, it was bounded. It was not, sufficiently dynamic. We weren't accounting for new inflow. And so we realized that, the real quest needed to be defining success in whether you actually were seeing homelessness itself, moving closer to zero rather than more people being housed. we came to see that, data, was the key to all of this, and understanding how a cooperative and outcome-oriented system was performing. But we were still in the world of the data that community had, which it still is the case, that HUD mandates an annual point in time count. Maybe some of you have participated in your community. In January, you go out and you do an estimate in a very cold night of, how many people you think are homeless. And then, some HUD TA consultants kind of create some kind of formula to get to a projected number. And then that data comes out about 18 months later. Not actionable, dated, but that is what communities have typically relied on to understand whether their efforts are succeeding or failing in terms of numbers of people experiencing homelessness. So we realized, and we couldn't easily find models other than in the world of public health registries, that you needed by name, comprehensive, dynamic data to begin to make headway against a dynamic problem like homelessness. And then we also saw that sort of remarkably in the 100,000 Homes campaign days, because it was, at that point, it was not, coupled with any new resources, the communities made unbelievable progress just when given a different goal. House, as many, we gave them targets in each community, but just get people housed, as opposed to, stop and think about how many more affordable housing resources you need. There was such resourcefulness surfaced in communities given the right goal and the right kind of team configuration, that we realized that we needed to be really questioning the understanding of this problem as a resource and a scarcity problem alone, and that communities didn't even have enough information typically to know what part of the problem housing supply or subsidies were, and that the only way they could learn that and to begin long-term making better policies was also, and as well as to use their resources in the most optimal ways, was again back to having the right data to tell them how their system was performing, as opposed to whatever they might be thinking was a meaningful measure, like how many people have called 211 for housing assistance. And so in any event, we began seeing the issue very differently, and what we needed to do is very different. And so what we've done in Built for Zero, and we can go to the next slide, David, is we're every day learning and tweaking this, but some pillars have emerged that really are underpinning the work that is driving these results I shared in the first slide. So we have implemented basically command center teams that are largely and initially constituted of a collection of key agencies. The leadership of this local continuum of care has to be there. They're sort of a proxy for all of the not-for-profit service providers who are receiving any kind of funding from public agencies. The Housing Authority, and very frequently in the past, the Housing Authority, which is the conduit for most subsidies and other affordable housing coming from the federal government. A lot of organizations working with the homeless, they didn't even know who those people were. It's like we got getting the Housing Authority leadership on the team. Local government, which can be a little tricky. And we've realized that one of the problems to be solved, and that we're experimenting with still, is how do you line up at every level what we're kind of coming to call stackable civic infrastructure. So it has to be like the large city, it has to be the county, the state, as well as federal policy, kind of reinforcing the outcome of zero homelessness, as opposed to pursuing some other goals. But at the local level, depending on whether it's a large city where most of the homelessness is concentrated, often even that's the case, it'll be the county that has a number of the mental health and other resources. Getting those entities, the Housing Authority, the continuum of care, and for other populations, for instance, veterans experiencing homelessness or young people experiencing homelessness, other agencies are involved. And so we've learned, while you ultimately, you need like the whole community rowing in this direction, that the key seats at the command center table are these public agencies and the coalition of not-for-profits who need to be seeing the problem in the same way, committing to the same end state, and agreeing on a shared measure of what success looks like and how that progress will be accounted for. And that takes us to the next slide. This commitment to a measurable end state. Now, it's interesting that that this seemingly so obvious point of like, how can you solve a problem where you don't actually like know what success looks like? Without it, you really can't get a system organized, of course, but you wonder like how anyone has thought this issue or any complex problem could be advanced. It's just interesting, in particular about, I guess it was earlier this year, we had worked with Boston University's Institute on Cities that conducts an annual survey of mayors on issues facing their communities and what's top of mind and how is that community responding. They had never surveyed mayors on homelessness, so we teamed up with them to embed a number of questions on their community's response to homelessness and also their own role and relationship to it. And I thought the most fascinating finding in that whole report was that mayors were stumped by that question. What should be the goal of our system? And we had answers across the board, from fewer citizen complaints to more money, more services, more housing, everything like with a question mark. The idea that you should be seeing fewer people experiencing homelessness and moving towards zero almost had not occurred to most of these mayors. And so setting the shared aim, we have come to find that even in addition to having that command center table, getting that group to agree to a shared aim, that's the beginning of change. And then the next slide, David, the breakthrough, as I mentioned earlier, is moving away from what has been just totally inadequate data and sort of like a lot of guesswork around what's really going on homelessness and what's causing it, and which has quite tragically led to the prevailing notion, I think, about this issue being that people choose to be homeless, or it's a problem of individual misfortune or behavior. And that is the answer folks, I think, generally fill in when they see a problem that they know, like, money is being spent and, aren't there organizations in town working on this? But the absence of anyone being fully accountable for knowing the problem its entirety has really allowed that very damaging and sinister, really, story to grow and spread. And the way we've realized you defeat it is, and to begin shifting both the story and community's ability to make progress in reducing homelessness, is through getting all of these players to actually populate a shared, privacy-protected, quality by name list. And we have developed with our communities essentially a checklist, which is sort of a quality measure. Can you answer these questions that will give you a strong sense of whether, like 90% certainty is the goal, that you are accounting for everyone, that you can update the information at least on a monthly basis, and that it's accurate at the person level. And so now that we have, I think, 62 communities who are there, we know it's very hard to do, but it's possible to do. I hope in the question and answer time, Jim Schlosser talks about our journey in Concord to make this happen in the face of like lots of resistance. But this really is the game changer in terms of having enough information to be able to monitor the system and to see what's not working and to see what the opportunities are for high leverage investments. The next slide, another key pillar, is communities, if they have the real commitment to that shared aim, they use their data not just to see whether they're getting ahead of the problem and reaching the people who need help with the appropriate services. They are courageously moving away from just rolling their investments forward because we've always done this. They're beginning to make different kinds of choices with their money, with their policy, to ultimately build an accountable, sustainable system. We have really exciting stories now of county governments saying, we're going to stop doing this and we're going to do this instead. Like that the data allows them to see what they need to do. And so in so many ways, it's an inversion of where we started out, in our work, just thinking, more money for housing, more money for housing. And I'm not saying that we don't need more housing, but if you don't have a picture of what the actual problems are that you're trying to solve at any given point, more housing is not necessarily going to result in less homelessness. And so as we see communities using their data to actually build accountable housing systems, that's very much kind of the end state we're working toward. And so maybe just a summary slide is next. What every community needs, and this is what our team works with them to set up. And we have our data team that helps communities pull together their data. We have a team that works with communities to help them get that group together, that facilitates the group coming to the shared aim. We have our quality improvement advisors who are teaching communities how to use quality improvement to actually build and run a learning system. And then we have the ability, thanks to this MacArthur grant that David mentioned at the beginning, to help communities that are part of Built for Zero with some strategic investments, some critical staff roles, some flexible resources to help solve some, often it's not large dollar amounts that can make a difference, but there's just like something that the federal program didn't anticipate. And as a result, this whole group of people are blocked from being housed. And then we're also, because we've organized Built for Zero as a network, as a learning network, we are collecting, and we probably have over 300 now, and sharing change packages, essentially mini case studies of ideas that different communities have tested using our quality improvement method adapted from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And so the benefit of being part of this network is you're always a step ahead. You're not innovating in a vacuum or alone, and you'll always have to adapt an idea to your own context. But there's a pretty robust set of starting points now that are available to help communities get started. So the aim, the team, the data, flexible resources, and the benefits of a network are the things that we see are making a big difference across the board. I think it's interesting, and I'm eager to get into the conversation in the Q&A period about Ostrom's principles. We can go to the next slide. And there's certainly a lot of resonance. So I'm was just thinking about our exchange tonight. I think there's just an awful lot we can kind of match up in terms of how what we've learned and are learning actually is informed by and validates the design principles. So I'll go a little bit more deeply into some of these elements in perhaps in the light of the design principles before we get into question and answer. Just anticipating that a little bit more detail from me might be helpful. So if we go to the next slide, David. So the methodology, like what happens when you join Built for Zero, is next slide. So I mentioned this command center table. Often it's like one or two of these folks who contact us. It's it might be the mayor or the head of the COC. Occasionally it's the VA. And they have been able to persuade at least one of the other people at this table, like, we've got to work differently. And often our role is to help them get the other folks around the table and, commit to this shared vision. And so that's the kind of the facilitation part of our work. And we've come to see that there are a couple of core competencies that our own team needs, that, that every team needs at this level, and facilitation skills being one of them. The next slide, David. This definition of functional zero. Yeah, it's interesting. There had never been a definition of what it means to end homelessness. And interestingly, in 2010, during the Obama administration, the country saw its first strategic plan for ending homelessness. And there was no definition of what it meant to end it. So as we're getting Built for Zero underway, we're like, we're going to need some help here. And so the VA offered this vision of ending veteran homelessness that, it was useful for its purpose. It was more a political definition. Like, if you've identified resources for all the veterans in your community, you've ended veteran homelessness. That actually didn't produce an end state of veteran homelessness. So while we work closely with the VA, we have worked with our communities to implement a much higher bar, which is basically a veteran could become homeless at any time. So really, it's about system capacity to quickly identify and quickly resolve and learn from that experience how to better prevent. And so this dynamic definition of functional zero is the one that we hold our communities to, because the political definition just proved not to do more than kind of get people moving. Wasn't bad, motivating, but it did not serve the purpose of really building a system. But there are other definitions that are meaningful for populations who are not so discrete as veterans. You are or you aren't a veteran. And so to the next slide, for the chronically homeless, this is a HUD definition. A chronically homeless person is someone who's experienced homelessness for a year or more, or several episodes within a 2 to 3 year period that result in more than a year, plus a disability. So, like, for someone to experience chronic homelessness, this is completely about system failure. Someone who is simply not been given the right match of resources and has languished in this state with steadily declining health. And so the functional zero definition that we have agreed with HUD on for the time being is that it's 0.1% of all homeless individuals. And you'll see what an actively homeless measure looks like. But we are working toward making this a hard zero, because truly you can see this condition coming, but as we're helping communities build their systems, we're realizing there needs to be a little bit of play, and that we're bringing HUD along, a bit slowly here. And then the next slide goes into this actively homeless concept. This is what we help communities put together in terms of when they have their complete data set. What they need to be looking at, every day, every week, every month, is how many people are actively homeless, but also picking that number apart and understanding the different inflow and outflow patterns and what's actually happening. Understanding your inflow, of course, is key to knowing how to prevent and what kind of problem you're solving for. Is it a return to homelessness? Is it someone who's reemerged after not being accounted for a period of time? Is it someone who's newly experiencing homelessness, which is the key to a certain type of prevention activity? And then also on the outflow side, how many people are being housed? How many people are kind of resolving perhaps their homelessness on their own? One of the things that communities had never been able to capture before having this kind of vision of the issue is that most people who experience homelessness sort it out themselves. They may use a charitable resource for a period of time, but then are able to activate their own networks and resolve this crisis on their own. but we, for years, we're simply holding resources for people who may not actually need them, or who may be in the hospital, or, so we now have a way of helping communities visualize and work with the dynamic nature of this dynamic problem in their data, and how they make decisions, and do case conferencing and resource allocation. So next, we have had an amazing partnership with the Tableau Foundation on the visualization tools to help communities use the clunky old data systems that HUD mandates to at least put a layer over that pulls out this actionable data and allows them to see their system, and whether they are actually making shifts toward a different, stably operating system moving towards zero homelessness. And so this is part of the work that my team does in helping communities organize their data, train folks who may be outreach workers, or their experience is basically in inputting data for those HUD reports, to actually become data analysts and to understand how data is the key to understanding the issue. I see a question in the chat. Maybe we could get back to that, or feel free to, Brian, do you want to say something right now? Oh, inactive.
No, I'm sorry, I don't have a mic.
Okay, I'll just say inactive means this goes to that condition I was describing, that say someone is in a short-term crisis, they end up, being registered as homeless in, your town, but then they move on. They make contact with their brother, and then they never return, but they are showing up, as homeless, but they haven't been seen ever again. But you still are, because the data had been so lagging in homelessness, it's necessary to account for folks who we have once seen but have not seen, and usually communities kind of set that line at either 60 or 90 days. So you're not lost in terms of you're in the system, but no resource is being held for you. And then if you come back from inactive, your place is still there. And so it basically allows for the fact that people can be in and out of homelessness, that people don't check out of homelessness, they just don't appear again at programs. And so it's important to have a way of tracking that, so you have kind of a meaningful sense of the actual nature of the system. But what you're looking at as a community team is that active number all the time, because that's where the action is, as far as what you need to do next in order to move toward that system level shift. And there's another slide that I think could illustrate this, and maybe David, if you could go. Well, there's first this critical slide. Also, part of what communities are experiencing with us, and as they get their arms around their data, is how to build and reform systems to make them equitable from a racial standpoint. It's one of the scandals of our country that a highly disproportionate percentage of those experiencing homelessness are Black and Native Americans, and that there are many places in the system where individuals can be actually experiencing bias. And so we need quality data to reveal that and help communities eliminate those areas of bias. But the next slide, I think we'll get to that inactive question. Oh no, sorry, got my slides a little out of order. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. This may be a little clearer to see, but for example, you see in Chattanooga's August 2018 data, they've been doing incredibly well. The number of veterans experiencing homelessness suddenly spiked up, but because of the fact that they have data that is just able to kind of highlight where the problems are. If you go to the next slide, please. They could pick apart what was going on in August 2018 and see, okay, it's been returns to homelessness from individuals who'd been housed. So, yeah, they could focus on that part of the problem. That could typically suggest, landlords not having enough support if they had a tenant newly placed from homelessness who was having difficulty. So anyway, the importance of having the returns from homelessness, inactive, new homelessness, allows communities to see and solve the right problem, as this slide illustrates. So if you saw all of a sudden a lot of folks becoming inactive, like some unusual percentage that you simply couldn't find that week or that month, to start interrogating your data about like what happened here. And so it's key to have these different levels of insight, both to know what your actual real-time challenge looks like, but also to understand what's happening in your system and your community. You see spikes in inactive often when there's been some kind of weather event, like where people have had to move quickly. And so that's why it's important to keep track of information, even for those individuals who are kind of off stage at a given time. But if we could go back, I think 3 slides, David, and that is I think the last slide I wanted to comment on. Oh, one more forward. Oh, maybe that's it. I'll just close by saying that we have really embraced as a key method in helping communities evolve their work, the work that we've learned from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, which is an adaptation of Deming's quality improvement model that was first adapted, I guess, from agriculture to manufacturing and then to healthcare. And then, we've imported it and adapted it to homelessness. And so what we find, especially at a time of such partisanship, it is powerful to be working with communities, training, these teams of shelter operators and county workers and, outreach teams to basically not be in fights grounded in ideological differences, but like to learn how to hypothesize a theory and test it in short cycles and help move a system forward through a learning process. And so this method is really at the heart of how we help communities and our own work to keep evolving toward a goal that we see very much as achievable, and that our MacArthur resources are designed to help, where our goal is by the end of 2026 that we'll have 50 communities with at least one proof point that a population has gotten to functional zero. But we see that as a strategy to just make their whole systems work differently. And in fact, that's happening now. We'll probably have by September our first 2 communities at zero for all. We have a dozen communities in that cohort that have already gotten to functional zero for at least 2 populations. We'll have our first large city, we hope, at functional zero for chronic or veteran within the next 18 months. But we'll also be, with the help of MacArthur, working much more deeply on the policy front in terms of aligning federal and state incentives behind population level results, and working on the very necessary communications initiatives that are so badly needed to remind people that this is a solvable problem, that like we've kind of imagined the impossibility of finding a solution to this problem. And then we also, I guess I do have one slide at the end, but we've also, in an interesting way, come back into the housing business, no longer starting with housing and wondering why, like, we're still having homelessness, but in our largest cities in Built for Zero, or at least the 16 largest, we are in the midst of, thanks to a social impact fund that we've created with a number of investors. We're just buying existing properties, multifamily rental properties and hotels, and converting that into not-for-profit owned housing for individuals on those by name lists to help those communities accelerate an end to veteran and chronic homelessness. But we now have kind of, I think, the outline of what a real high-performing, equitable housing system can look like, where it has this system architecture in place, people with the right understanding of the problem, the right cooperative structures, the right information, and housing that fits into it, that is essentially an element of a housing system rather than this kind of standalone activity that which is where we began, that was not in and of itself solving the problem. So I'll stop there and eager for your thoughts.
That is so amazing. Okay, my policy is that I never ask the first question. And so if we could raise our virtual hands to line up, then I'm sure that there'll be questions. That is so amazing. But and I would like to ask Russ to line up among others. But now, Manuel, you are the first.
Okay, thank you, David. Rosanne, thanks very much. Amazing presentation. I'd love to hear all the systemic approach and adaptive challenge approach and all the things. As a consultant, I really resonate with what you did. But two quick questions. One is, what do you think of the mayor of New York? You say you started in New York. I mean, his thing about police arresting homeless people and taking them to a medical treatment, a psychiatric treatment. That seems to be the latest thing. And the second question would be, I live in Oakland, California, and we've been having homelessness here for years and years, and we changed mayors. And what do you have any insights for Oakland? That's it. Those are my two questions.
Okay, well, thank you for raising them, Manuel. I should say, we only work with communities that want to work with us, and it takes a great deal of humility, I think, almost to adopt this approach, because you basically have to say, this is a lot more complicated. What we're doing isn't working. That said, New York City and Oakland are not part of Built for Zero. Yeah, we'd love them to join. So everything I can say about them comes from a distance. I mean, I live in Concord now. Like, I just read the paper like everyone else and like, oh, New York. And, it's heartbreaking because, it doesn't have to be that way. But with respect to that latest initiative of the mayor, it is an illustration of just what you do in the midst of a broken system when you're not thinking at the right level. First of all, he's not wrong. I used to do outreach work in New York City, and there are people who are going to die on the street, and it's easier to say, oh, well, like they're choosing, because it's really tough, when you're seeing someone who is clearly like they're not about to like push someone onto a subway track, not to be graphic, but they may die that night because it's freezing cold and they're like barefoot. And I've had the experience many times earlier on of just having to just stand my ground and force a policeman to, using the existing mental health laws, to say, we need to bring this person somewhere. The law already provides that, but it's just hard to implement because no one wants to be in conflict with a kind of a vulnerable person. And I think outreach workers, police, they're always scared. That said, if you were basically saying, we want to just do what the law allows us to do, which is to be responsible when people are in crisis and get them to a place that they can be evaluated, or at least they're not going to die or be harmed tonight, why would you announce it on the first page of the New York Times? You just start doing it. You train your staff to do the work that needs to be done within the laws as they are written. And so just, like, it's just heartbreaking, that this is the wrong message. But the implementation is hard. And my own experience was there was never clear and consistent guidance or support. And between the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, the outreach system, and but in a different system, because we see this happening in other communities where there is this collaboration, you don't get to these cliffs. People are working differently to avoid these kinds of dramas. So that's the story on, the reaction to the New York news, and also on Oakland.
Thank you,
Absolutely,
Rosanne.
Oakland could learn
Appreciate
from
it.
this.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Go ahead, continue.
Russ.
Thank you, David. Terrific talk and a brilliant example of how to approach the organization of systems so that they work better. This group, I think I can say, is brought together under the umbrella of David's pro-social program, and foundational to that program is the understanding of social connection as being the key to the evolution of our species. The value of social connection as being the key to the effective functioning of communities, and including along the lines of Ostrom's guidelines, and the need for social connection as being often the explanation for dysfunction, for problems in functioning amongst humans and in human communities when that need is not met for whatever reason.
Mhm.
So my question to you is, what have you learned in this work about the role of social connections or problems in failures of social connection in leading to homelessness and leading to the persistence of homelessness? And have you seen examples, at least, since it doesn't seem to be a focus of your programmatic approach, of communities using approaches to end homelessness that involve empowering people through improving social connection and collaboration and supporting each other, not just at the system level amongst people who, of course, spend their lives working together, but amongst the people who you are trying to serve, who are among the most socially disconnected and socially disadvantaged people in the country?
It's a great question, and we have not systematically studied it, and it makes me curious about how we might. I think there are probably many ways we could. It just hasn't been, something that we focused on. So I can't quote a study or any evidence like that. But what I will just describe from observation is that at the team level, that command center team, that's all about social connection. Yeah, like that, getting people who really have always had interdependent roles to play in, creating a strong like housing safety net and housing system, especially for the vulnerable in their community. Very frequently, folks had not even known each other across different, like the VA and the housing authority, not to mention within, between different organizations who all were doing kind of their own thing on homelessness. And so it's been creating a mechanism, a process for there being a connected collective approach to this issue that has shifted it. That's the essence of it. But even within that, and this is something we learned in the 100,000 Homes campaign days, to try to get above the inadequate data that people had from their HUD pit counts. We launched this process of registry weeks. Like, we got to figure out who's actually homeless, what they need. And so communities, we would typically do it like over a week or 2 weeks, but like lots of volunteers, go out, in the middle of the night, just, cover every zone of the area and document, have conversations with people experiencing homelessness. And I have to say, I saw it in so many communities, people would come back from participating in that as like the pit count survey is you can walk around and with a clipboard and just kind of note, saw a person who seemed to be homeless. But when you have to be in conversation with people, that's a very different experience. And people would come back from these registry weeks and like at the end of, in the morning afterwards, and they had been changed. They're like, oh my God, I just interviewed like a 25-year-old woman under the bridge. I've got a 25-year-old daughter. I can't believe this is happening in my community. What do I have to do next? Like that interaction in a problem solving, kind of context where you're getting, to understand what was actually happening in your community. And, like that created a whole different shift in momentum. And it was that encounter. And what we see, interestingly, it might be hopping around here, but it's just another, related observation. A lot of rural and, interestingly, I'd say like southern communities, in fact, that have typically over relied, or that's not correct, that they may not have anything like the robust, not-for-profit sector that you find in urban areas, that they have really relied on faith groups to do a lot of the work with people in need. It has been amazing to see that, like, kind of given like a framework, like the job is not, serving soup or handing out, hospitality bags. The job is actually housing people, and we're going to do this together. And we're going to hold ourselves accountable. That this really plays into I think the structure and the identity of many smaller communities, and especially in rural and southern areas where the social safety net has kind of been of a different order. And again, it's all relational. So.
Yeah, that's so much to say. Brian, and then I'm so eager to take my turn.
I don't know how well my audio is going to work. I've got music going on behind me. So I'm going to go ahead and just post a question to the chat, and my time may also be limited. So if you could just read that, Matt. I don't know if my audio is working well enough. As I shared with Jim Jim earlier today, I have both personal and civic experience with homelessness here in Roanoke, dating back to 2008. Although I've not been homeless over the last 8 years, to an extent haven't been as actively engaged with the local homelessness issue since that point. Roanoke governance has, over the last year or so, also, as Manuel was mentioning, criminalized homelessness within the community. It's a real turnaround. I mean, when I started working with the local community in 2008, they had continuum of care in place and were very, very proactive. And It just seems as though all that has changed. I really appreciate your comment about the possibility of shifting from a more urban focus to a more rural kind of distributed system. One of the things, as I mentioned, I've had some proximity to Kate Rayworth's work, and just in a workshop with her very recently, Kate said her donut economic model is primarily based on two elements, two elemental components. That's regeneration and distribution. So, and from a systems view, the definition of complex systems entails, self-regulation, and in an evolutionary sense, I think, there's a natural selection in a vibrant, healthy. So part of the question is how do we reinstate vibrancy, life vibrancy back into a system that's more distributed, more regenerative.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, I appreciate the observation, and I will say, all of this progress that communities are making, that we're honored to be part of, it is pretty fragile. Like that, like the leader of the COC who's really committed to this retires. There's a new mayor. Like there's a new police chief, and you're having to claw your way back to, kind of reinforce and protect the gains. And so, I'm sorry to hear that there's been regression on that in the Roanoke area.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's amazing that you've done as well as you have at the systemic scale. One of the things your talk speaks to me about is the scale independence and the context independence of the core design principles that can be applied at the level of teams, as you said. Yeah, you made that point yourself. But also when we apply those principles at the whole system level, then that's where this quantitative systemic quality improvement approach becomes necessary. I mean, basically all the monitoring you did obviously falls into the monitoring part of the core design principles. CDP1, basically the shared goal, is something that you said, absolutely has to come first. But in order to do it at the system level, then you have to bring in all this quantification and it's like necessary. So I guess I have two questions to ask. First of all, in our experience, we often find that when we work with groups, we feel that they're not ready for quantification yet. When we try to apply scientific methods, it's just like too much of a burden for them, and we end up delaying that. But what I'm getting from you is that we can't really do that. We have to be strong on assessment and monitoring and actually get people into a data frame of mind, because I think you said that one way that this becomes apolitical is to go beyond just the polemic nature of it and to actually get into some kind of a problem solving mode where people can work together. So how you can implement quantification so strongly and at the beginning is my first question, and then I'll follow it up with a second one.
Well, it helps. It helps that it's now kind of a thing with our work, that even in the 100,000 home campaign days, it was like, you need to have better data. It's kind of like, so the folks who joined this movement and people who were eyeing it for years and then kind of decided this is what they are bought into. If we certainly have had cases of communities joining, but never getting their act together on data, and it's like, we can't help you. And so I think, to answer your question, David, this is such a pillar of what you sign up for when you join Built for Zero, that it's the right invitation, the clarity of it, and you're just going to fall away if you're not committed to
Okay.
this.
And
And-
what I'm getting is that you have a role model in quality improvement. And so basically there's other sectors in which this has become very normative and well practiced and so on that you're able to build upon. Do I get that part right?
Exactly. And at the outset, that was our claim. Like, the only way we're going to be able to do this is if we have real information. And then we've learned over time how much better the information needs to get and have better ways of collecting it. And, what kind of technology supports and visualization supports make it easier, what kind of training communities need in order to play at that level. But I think by making it a requirement of participation, and mind you, communities don't have to pay to be part of Built for Zero, but we do expect you to do the work, and so I think if you're working with folks who are seeking your support, drawing that line of saying, like, we can only go so far if we don't actually start getting the information in place we require in order to know whether what you're doing is working. I think you have to be willing to kind of draw that line and certainly offer help if there's willingness, and it's a capacity question. But if it's an indifference issue and just not believing how important that kind of monitoring is, I think maybe it's a question for you about stepping back and not kind of pursuing that kind of depth of engagement if there isn't the possibility of a meaningful feedback loop being established.
Yeah, that's great. So my second question is actually builds off of Russ Schutz. He had to drop off the meeting, but and if the goal, what everyone needs basically is to live in such social environments that are nurtured and appropriately structured so that they have abundant social support in addition to their personal resources. And that's a broader goal than housing. So as you take this individualized approach, I wonder if you're already doing it or if it would be worthwhile doing it, is to make the goal, well, basically to make the housing a part of a larger goal of finding building a social environment around each individual so that that would be housing plus more. And with respect to housing, and Gus actually has done work on this, is there a group housing model as opposed to an individual housing model, and so on and so forth. So the relationship between housing and broader forms of social support is my question.
Yeah. Well, what we have found is that because the goal is not just reaching functional zero once, but staying there, people will need different combinations of support, financial, social, medical, in order to remain stably housed. And so, what we help community teams do is really understand what is it going to take person by person to see that transition happens, or that people don't become homeless in the first place, that the prevention system in the community really is like that. Social support is the key to prevention, frankly, prevention of homelessness. Right. But what that can look like can really differ by the person or family. So there's nothing, that we prescribe. Those buildings I showed you that we built back in the day, they all had social workers and, all sorts of intentionality around building communities. I used to think of myself as, running these buildings as the mayor of a small town, that was the job, just, keep people connected and get them what they need. And that's what we have incorporated into the buildings that we're buying now. However, I think what mainly needs to happen in communities, driven by like this kind of shared commitment to the outcome of we're not going to have homelessness in our community, is like, where do we need to strengthen the social connections and supports so that people don't become or linger in homelessness? But that may look very different for each person. And, having that intention and a range of choices and the ability to calibrate to the person and even to the stage of life, that flexibility and the feedback loop is what you need.
So highly individualized and highly contextual. So I think that's a very important take-home message. Paul.
Thank you, Roseanne. It was a wonderful talk. My question is in relation to Pro-Social World's mission, I guess. As I was listening to you, I was thinking this is so beautiful application of what we do in a specific space. And I guess what I'm thinking about is, if we think of ourselves as trying to build, well, two questions really. With Pro-Social World, if we think about it as trying to build capacity to identify and work with these sorts of systemic groups type issues in the way that you've talked about, what do you think are the core, most essential skills and capabilities that we need to be training people in order to think and act systemically in this way? And a related question, maybe you could bundle this in, it actually came out of what David was just asking. A lot of what you do is tied to a particular measure, which is in a particular context. The functional zero piece is all about homelessness. Is it possible to recommend general measures, or does that undercut our ability, Pro-Social World, if we're trying to be more domain general in terms of enhancing collaboration in all sorts of ways? Maybe it becomes more about sort of identifying what the key measure is in the way that collective impact does, for example. So I'm not sure if that's clear, but I'm really grappling with this issue of whether, there are many advantages to working in a particular very concrete domain rather than trying to work across multiple domains. And I suppose that, as I said, the original question was, what are the key skills and capabilities that you would want to see our society being skilled up in to think and act in this way?
Well, I'd say, Paul, that the main takeaway is, how do we train people, like along with numeracy and literacy, in collaboration? And there are practices that we teach our team, and our team teaches communities that support that. Some being like facilitation skills, to bring a group together, set goals, kind of move a process forward. And then there are different techniques within that, but how to facilitate a diverse group, that is a teachable skill. And also data analytics, just the ability to understand, like how to collect and understand, a dynamic system by, pulling together, information, and not simply to, file a report, but to really discern and create a sense in that, in that group of a common truth, using, kind of information that is trusted because it's been kind of co-created and populated together. Quality improvement, as I've said, is just kind of the root of our kind of learning system, and just it enables groups to like never be stuck. Like, all right, you're blocked. What can we try? Like, what can we do over the next 30 or 60 days, as opposed to, everything in the human services world in terms of contracting tends to expect you to make the case for, like, for this amount of money, I'm going to do this, over the next year. Whereas chances are you're going to have to learn, if it's a tricky issue like homelessness, like what we're going to need to reach the goal. So it's quality improvement kind of cuts against the way I think most of us have been habituated, who have relied on government contracts or philanthropic initiatives to basically just kind of insist on the learning question and our ideas and how we're going to test and reject and evolve them. So that kind of, it's not just teaching quality improvement. It's not like, well, if you've been to a Six Sigma course, you're in. It's really like how to just keep encountering questions in a learning mindset. That's what we teach. And then I say another important capability, sorry about the dog, is human-centered design and and how to evolve the idea of bringing the user, the person experiencing the problem, into the learning and the hypothesizing. As I think I showed you, like the key shift in our work was doing these mapping exercises where we realized like nobody has a clue how this is all adding up. And it was not until we started speaking directly to people on the street that we understood that we had a systems problem, not a resource problem. And so we teach people who work for us, we then teach our communities, teams, human-centered design skills. So it's all under the banner of collaboration, but those are the actual teachable skills and practices that we found to be helpful.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Paul, and then I'll do a little wrap up.
Oh no, that's it. I mean, I guess as a general thing, pro-social world is zeroing in on a mixture of qualitative and quantitative research, but we are yet to sort of settle on really detailing key measures of collaborative capacity in a system. And the other part of my question was around that piece of sort of, is it ever going to be possible to have such a general measure, or is it always going to be very domain specific, I guess?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we are working on is like, we just see there's a need for a new profession in the world, not just our world of homelessness, but of the system leader, the system integrator, somebody whose job it is to just kind of bring these tables together. And as we're developing job description, and we have an ability to kind of I think help fund these roles in some of our communities. It's been interesting to be in touch with folks in other fields and realize like we're looking for the same thing. Yeah, like whether it's in climate or in public health. Yeah, like this is the nature of the world we're in. Yeah, like it's not that these problems that are so demanding live in one space. It's at the intersection, and we need different kinds of training, different kinds of roles that I think do support the collaboration that is going to be key to making progress in all of these areas.
Yeah, there's a lot of convergence with these methods, the quality improvement, human-centered design. These are all, in our way of thinking, parts of conscious cultural evolution, conscious cultural multi-level evolution. When you look at that act, think, do cycle, that's a variation, selection, replication cycle again and again and again. And I think that there's many different organizations that have converged upon this set of methods that we're all learning. So I don't want to take us over time, but Rosanne, this is so great, and you know that we're eager to explore collaborative potential, and so this was, I think, a great step in that direction. This has been recorded; it can be viewed. I hope to get back to you as to what we can do together, how we can join forces together, and what the collaborative potential is. But it's just so wonderful to have heard from you in this way.
Well, thank you so much for the interest in our work, and so glad to be reconnected. And maybe Jim, we can figure out a way like that pro-social world can descend on Concord, help us out.
Yeah,
that would be
there we
very
go.
good.
There we go.
Yes,
There would be a nexus. So we'll work on that. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. And then
Thank
we'll
you,
see
Rosanne.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
Great work.
Great work.
So let's see. Paul has dropped. Okay. So